There was a television show that changed American culture in ways that few other programs ever did. Soul Train wasn't just another music show on TV. It was something completely different and revolutionary. For over 3 decades, it brought black music, dance, and culture into living rooms across America. But in 2006, the show suddenly disappeared from television without any real explanation. Most people never understood what really happened, except for rumors about one final episode that was filmed but never shown to the public. The man behind Soul Train was Don Cornelius, who was born in Chicago in 1936. He grew up during a time when black people and white people were forced to live separately because of discriminatory laws that existed throughout much of America. Don didn't start his career in television right away. Before he ever worked on TV, he had many different jobs trying to make a living. He worked as a traffic police officer directing cars at intersections, and he also worked in sales, trying to convince people to buy various products. His path to television wasn't straightforward or easy, but in 1966, he decided to go to broadcasting school to learn about television and radio production. This decision changed his life completely. Soon after finishing his training, he got hired at a local TV station in Chicago where he worked as a news reporter and announcer. While working at this Chicago television station, Don noticed something that bothered him deeply. There were almost no television programs that featured black people or black culture in a positive way. Most shows on TV were made for white audiences, and black Americans rarely saw themselves represented on screen. Don had an idea that seemed simple but was actually revolutionary for its time. He wanted to create a music and dance show specifically for black audiences, something that would showcase black talent, black music, and black culture. He named his show Soul Train, and it first appeared on television on August 17, 1970, on a local Chicago station. The show featured live musical performances, energetic dancing, and local singers who got a chance to perform on television. People in Chicago loved it immediately because they had never seen anything quite like it before. The show was so successful in Chicago that it caught the attention of television executives and sponsors from around the country. Just a little over a year after it started in Chicago, on October 2, 1971, Soul Train began broadcasting nationally to television stations across America. Major companies like Sears and Johnson Products, which made beauty and hair care products for black consumers, provided financial support to keep the show running. The program had everything that made it exciting to watch. There was incredible music performed by talented artists, dancers wore colorful and fashionable clothes that set trends, and the dance moves were so creative and cool that viewers at home would try to copy them. Soul Train quickly became must-see television for millions of people every week. During the peak years of Soul Train's popularity, virtually every major black music artist in America appeared on the show. Legendary performers like James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Michael Jackson, and the Jackson 5 all came to perform on Soul Train. As the years went on and music evolved, newer artists like LL Cool J and Mary J. Blige also made appearances. But the show wasn't only about the famous singers who performed. The dancers who appeared on Soul Train every week also became celebrities in their own right. Some of these dancers went on to have successful careers in entertainment. Rosie Perez, who later became a famous actress, got her start as a Soul Train dancer. Jody Watley became a successful singer after dancing on the show. There was even a dancer named Jeffrey Daniel who became so well known for his moves that he taught Michael Jackson how to do the moonwalk, one of the most famous dance moves in history. One of the most memorable and exciting parts of every Soul Train episode was something called the Soul Train line. This was a special segment where all the dancers on the show would form 2 parallel lines facing each other, creating a pathway down the middle. Then, one by one or in pairs, dancers would take their turn dancing down this pathway while everyone else watched and cheered them on. Each person who danced down the line would show off their own unique style and their best dance moves. It was like a friendly competition where everyone got their moment to shine and be the star. The Soul Train line became so iconic that people still reference it and recreate it at parties and events today. Soul Train was much more than just entertainment on television. It served a deeper cultural purpose that was especially important during the 1970s and 1980s. For Black Americans watching at home, Soul Train was one of the few places on national television where they could see people who looked like them, dressed like them, and enjoyed the same music they loved. The show presented Black people in a positive, confident, and stylish way, which was rare on television at that time. For young people watching the show every week, it became something they looked forward to and talked about with their friends. For the lucky dancers and performers who got to appear on Soul Train, being on the show could actually change their entire life and open doors to fame and success. Don Cornelius wasn't just the smooth, voiced host who introduced the performers each week. He was the creative force and business mind behind everything that happened on Soul Train. As the show's creator and executive producer, Don controlled every aspect of the production. He decided which musical artists would perform, what songs they would sing, what the dancers should wear, and how the entire show should look and feel. Don had a distinctive style as a host. He was always calm, cool, and serious, which gave Soul Train a different atmosphere compared to other music shows that were more wild and energetic. Don believed strongly that television should represent all Americans, not just white people, and that Black culture deserved to be shown in a dignified and positive way. For more than 30 years, Soul Train produced over 1,000 episodes, making it the longest-running music show in American television history. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, the show reached its highest point of popularity, with millions of viewers tuning in every week to watch. For companies that sold products marketed to Black consumers, such as cosmetics, hair care products, and clothing, advertising on Soul Train was incredibly valuable because they knew they could reach millions of potential customers. The show became such a cultural phenomenon that it expanded beyond just the weekly television program. They created the Soul Train Music Awards ceremony, organized Soul Train fashion shows, and sold various Soul Train branded products. Don Cornelius became one of the most powerful and influential figures in Black entertainment. In 1971, Life magazine recognized his impact by naming him one of the 100 most important people in America. But success and fame often come with challenges and problems, and Soul Train was about to face some serious difficulties. As the show grew bigger and more successful, tensions began to emerge behind the scenes. Don Cornelius was known for being extremely strict and demanding about his show. He controlled everything that appeared on television and had very specific ideas about how the dancers should dress and move. Rosie Perez, who danced on Soul Train for several years before becoming an actress, later remembered that Don didn't allow dancers to perform moves that he considered too sexually suggestive or that didn't match his vision for what the show should be. She recalled being told to change how she danced on at least one occasion because Don felt it didn't fit the show's image. Something that bothered many people who worked on Soul Train was that the dancers who appeared on the show every week were never paid for their performances. The dancers understood that just appearing on national television was valuable exposure that could lead to fame and career opportunities, so they accepted working without payment. However, as time went on, some of these dancers felt exploited and used. The show made substantial amounts of money from advertising and sponsorships, and a large part of what made the show exciting was the creativity and energy that the dancers brought. Yet they received nothing except the exposure. The biggest problem that Soul Train faced came in the late 1980s when hip-hop music started becoming extremely popular, especially among young people. Don Cornelius had strong negative feelings about hip-hop music. He believed that much of hip-hop promoted negative stereotypes about black people, with its references to violence, criminal activity, and its use of profane language. In 1992, he made a public statement saying that he didn't want his show to feature music that didn't represent positive values. This stance made many people angry and frustrated. Musicians, music industry professionals, and younger viewers criticized Don for being old, fashioned, and out of touch with what young people wanted to hear and see. While Soul Train was refusing to feature hip-hop artists, other television programs seized the opportunity to fill that gap. New shows like MTV Raps and Rap City on BET started showcasing hip-hop music and culture. Major hip-hop artists who were dominating the music charts, like Tupac Shakur Nas and Snoop Dogg, almost never appeared on Soul Train because the show wouldn't book them. Young viewers who loved hip-hop music started watching these other shows instead of Soul Train, and the show's audience began to shrink significantly. Because Soul Train wasn't featuring the music that younger audiences wanted to hear, the number of people watching the show declined steadily. In the early 1980s, over 4 million people watched Soul Train every week. By the early 2000s, that number had dropped to only about 2 million viewers. Television stations that broadcast Soul Train started moving it to less desirable time slots when fewer people were watching, or they replaced it entirely with newer shows that attracted more viewers. In 1993, after hosting Soul Train for 23 years, Don Cornelius made the decision to step down as the show's host. Over the following years, several different hosts tried to fill his shoes, including Mistro Clark, Shimmer Moore, and Dorian Gregory, but none of them had the same special presence and authority that Don had brought to the show. The producers tried various strategies to revitalize Soul Train and make it relevant again. They redesigned the set to look more modern, they hired different hosts, and they even started inviting more hip-hop artists to perform, reversing Don's earlier policy. But nothing seemed to work. Compared to newer music shows on television, Soul Train felt outdated and tired. Between 2003 and 2006, Soul Train began producing fewer episodes each season, and many of the experienced staff members who had worked on the show for years quit or moved on to other jobs. Producing a weekly television show cost a lot of money, and with ratings continuing to decline, the companies that sponsored and distributed the show began questioning whether it was worth the investment. Don Cornelius largely withdrew from public life during this period. He stopped attending public events and rarely gave interviews to reporters. The show that had once made him famous and that he had been so proud of now seemed like a relic from a bygone era. Soul Train continued to air new episodes every week, but it no longer felt important or relevant in the television landscape. New musical artists didn't see appearing on Soul Train as a valuable career opportunity anymore. The dancers who appeared on the show during these final years didn't stay long, and the entire production felt like it was just going through the motions. Then in 2006, something happened during the filming of what would turn out to be the very last episode of Soul Train. After that day, the show never came back to television. In March 2006, Soul Train was scheduled to film another regular episode at their studio in Los Angeles. On paper, it seemed like just another ordinary day of production. But people who were present at the studio that day later said that everything felt wrong and chaotic from the very beginning. The production crew had been changed at the last minute, with different people working than usual. The list of scheduled guests was confused and disorganized, and the people in charge of the production didn't seem to have a clear plan for what they were doing. Some people who were there that day reported that Don Cornelius was backstage, even though he was no longer officially involved with the day-to-day production of the show. People who had worked with Don for many years said that he appeared clearly unhappy and upset with how much the show had changed from his original vision. The episode was supposed to feature a young hip-hop artist, but the filming started almost an hour late because the artist's management team was having heated arguments with the television crew about something. A former staff member who was present that day later said that the performance that was filmed included content that crossed the boundaries of what Soul Train had always represented. The dancing, the costumes, and the visual presentation were too provocative and sexually explicit, and they didn't match the family-friendly image that Don had always insisted on maintaining for his show. The situation apparently became so problematic that Don Cornelius ordered everyone to stop filming. He then called an emergency meeting with representatives from the companies that helped distribute Soul Train to television stations across the country. One of the major distribution companies, Tribune Entertainment, made the decision to end their business relationship with Soul Train shortly after this meeting took place. Without the support of Tribune Entertainment, Soul Train lost the ability to broadcast to television stations throughout America. Within just 3 weeks of that troubled filming day, more than 40% of the local TV stations that had been airing Soul Train dropped the show from their schedules. No official public announcement was ever made declaring that Soul Train was canceled or that the show was ending. However, people who worked in the television industry understood that this was effectively the final episode of Soul Train. The Soul Train website stopped being updated with new information. Television networks that had been airing the show put other programs in Soul Train's time slot instead. The production schedule for future episodes was canceled and never reinstated. Soon after these events, several news reports in entertainment trade publications began discussing this unaired episode as the main reason why Soul Train ended. Even though the episode was never broadcast on television, some footage from that day reportedly still exists in the possession of former staff members who worked on the show. Fans on social media started calling it a cursed performance and speculating about what might have happened during that filming. This controversial episode didn't just disrupt one day of production, it marked the quiet and unceremonious end of one of the most important and influential television shows in American history. But the consequences extended beyond just the show going off the air. It damaged the legacy that Don Cornelius had spent his entire life building. Immediately after Soul Train disappeared from television, the media largely stopped talking about it, and Don Cornelius refused to give any interviews about what had happened. In 2007, he made a rare appearance on a local radio show where he briefly addressed the subject, saying only, "I think it went far enough," before declining to say anything more. After that, he almost completely withdrew from public life. Many people who knew him believed he felt betrayed by the very entertainment industry system he had once controlled, as other people took his creation in a direction he no longer recognized or approved of, while the general public remained confused and curious about why the show had ended so abruptly. Some former dancers and performers started sharing their thoughts and feelings about Soul Train's ending. Rosie Perez described the show's sudden end as an unnamed sadness. Dorian Gregory, who had been the host during the final years of the show, admitted in interviews that no one on the production team had been clearly told what was happening. Many people who worked on the show only realized it was permanently over when the filming schedule simply disappeared from the computer system without explanation. Independent entertainment journalists started investigating what had happened to Soul Train. A 2008 article in Vibe magazine reported that Soul Train wasn't canceled because of low ratings or lack of audience, but because the trust and working relationships between the people producing the show had completely fallen apart. The Soul Train Music Awards, which had been held annually since 1987, continued to take place, but they were separated from the original television show. Even though Don Cornelius had created the awards ceremony, control of it was transferred to BET in 2009. The new awards shows had a more contemporary style and rarely mentioned or celebrated the golden years of the original Soul Train show. This made longtime fans feel even more sadness and loss, as if an important part of American popular culture had been erased from collective memory without proper acknowledgement or explanation. Meanwhile, old episodes of Soul Train from its glory days started appearing on the internet. People uploaded VHS recordings and performance clips from the 1970s and 1980s to YouTube, and these videos accumulated millions of views. A new generation of fans emerged, mostly young people who had never watched the original show when it aired, but who were attracted to its music, fashion, and classic performance style. However, the final years of the show and the turbulent events of the 2000s remained largely undiscussed and mysterious. What became increasingly noticeable was the series of personal troubles that followed Don Cornelius after the show ended. In 2008, he was arrested for domestic violence, though he didn't serve jail time. Then in 2012, Don Cornelius died by suicide at his home in Los Angeles, leaving behind many unanswered questions about his life and the end of Soul Train. The Los Angeles Times wrote in a memorial piece that even though Cornelius was a pioneering figure who broke new ground in television, he left the public stage in the quietest and saddest way possible. After his death, television historians began examining the entire journey and impact of Soul Train with fresh perspective. Some called it a fragmented legacy, while others believed the show had accomplished what it was meant to do historically, and its quiet ending was simply the natural way that cultural phenomena decline. But what remained undeniable was that the 2006 broadcast shutdown was still surrounded by unresolved mysteries and unanswered questions. Some people began calling it the Soul Train curse, a phrase that was more symbolic than literal. But when looking at what happened to many of the people who had been part of the show for a long time, from dancers to its founder, the sense of an uneasy and troubled ending feels very real. The emotional pain and disappointment, more than any financial loss, was what many former staff members still carried with them years later. Even though Soul Train ended quietly and without ceremony, the legacy of the show continues to shape culture, both artistically and in collective memory. And it is these unfinished pieces and unresolved questions that have led to various efforts to preserve and celebrate its legacy in new forms. Nearly 20 years after it disappeared from television, Soul Train has not been forgotten by any means. Instead of fading into the past, the show has become the subject of revival and commemoration in many different ways. From documentary films and television dramas to museum exhibitions, each of these works confirms one important truth: the influence of Soul Train still pulses through popular culture, especially within the African American community. In 2019, BET announced its first full-length biographical television series about Don Cornelius's life called American Soul, with actor Sinqua Walls playing Cornelius. The series dramatized the show's early days during a turbulent period in American society. While some parts were fictionalized for dramatic effect, the show explored tensions and conflicts that the general public had never known about, such as the internal struggles to preserve Black identity and creative control within a television industry that was controlled by white executives. Though the series didn't directly address the fateful 2006 taping, American Soul captured the intense pressures and conflicts that existed behind the show's glamorous exterior. Museums and cultural exhibitions began including Soul Train in their heritage collections. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture now holds various artifacts from the show, including original costumes that dancers wore on air. During scholarly discussions and academic conferences, researchers argued that Soul Train should be considered a cultural treasure worthy of careful preservation, much like Motown music or the social art movements of the 1960s and 1970s. YouTube became an important platform for collective memory and nostalgia. Thousands of performance videos, behind-the-scenes clips, and interview footage were uploaded and shared. Some came from personal archives, while others came from local TV stations that had once aired the show. Audiences born after the year 2000, young people who never experienced the show firsthand during its original run, have become a new generation of enthusiastic fans. They study and copy the choreography, recreate the fashion styles, and even host themed parties inspired by the famous Soul Train line. On social media platforms, the hashtag Soul Train Challenge went viral in 2021. Young artists like Lizzo, Anderson .Paak, and HER took part, posting videos of themselves dancing in the show's classic style. Some older adults even held costume competitions themed around 1970s fashion to honor the show's memory and influence. From a historical preservation standpoint, many scholars and archivists are now calling for a complete restoration of the entire series from 1971 to 2006. A number of tapes, especially from the early years, have been digitally restored and made available on streaming platforms, but the final seasons remain largely untouched and unavailable. The last episode, taped in 2006, though never destroyed, has still never been released to the public. Many believe it will never be officially published due to legal complications and content concerns. The legacy that Don Cornelius left behind is no longer measured simply by the number of episodes that aired over 3 decades. Instead, his legacy is defined by how the show established and embodied a concept, a music program that was not just for entertainment, but that served as a cultural statement and declaration. Soul Train was the first place where Black Americans could see themselves on national television in their own clothes, performing their own dances, enjoying their own music. It represented a rare form of cultural power and visibility, especially during an era that was still marked by racial separation and discrimination in the early 1970s. The sudden silence of 2006 could not erase that fundamental impact and importance. On the contrary, it transformed Soul Train into what some call an interrupted icon, a cultural monument that ended before its story felt complete. And it is precisely that incompleteness and mystery that continues to fuel the public's desire for answers and closure. What remains from Soul Train is more than just old performance footage stored in archives. It is a shared memory that connects generations of people. Those who danced to Curtis Mayfield, who sat in front of the television on Saturday afternoons, who believed there was a place on screen where Black dreams and Black joy were allowed to exist and be celebrated. Though Soul Train ended nearly 20 years ago, the values it represented remain vivid in memory and popular culture. The unaired episode may forever stay in the shadows, never to be seen by the public, but the light that Don Cornelius ignited with his vision continues to spread and influence new generations. That light is not only the legacy of a television program, it is a statement of identity, voice, and presence for a community that was once overlooked and underrepresented in American media. And sometimes, what never aired is exactly what history remembers most powerfully.